Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to another episode, and really happy to be here today with another super interesting guest, Dan Clouser. Dan, for 30 years, ran a not-for-profit youth sports organisation called the Big Vision Foundation. It was run from a 130-acre sports complex for baseball and softball. He loved what he did, but in 2019, something changed, and Dan and his wife Sandy hit the road in an RV with their dog. Before they left, they sold all the possessions that they didn't need. This sounds like a massive and strange change to make, but in fact, Dan was returning to a lifestyle long ingrained in him by his hippie mother, Loretta. Whilst traveling around the USA, Dan writes, speaks, and also hosts a podcast of his own. So I really was interested to have Dan on to find out everything about making that massive change, which I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in, but also obviously what you're finding and discovering on your journey, Dan. So to start with, I just love people to tell us a bit about themselves, about your background, your origins, why this is where you are now, and especially if you don't mind delving a bit more into your childhood, I guess, the growing up with Loretta and how you think that got ingrained in you, that kind of hippie-ish lifestyle.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Like you said, my wife and I live full-time in an RV now. We've been doing it for just over 2 years. We absolutely love the lifestyle. It was ingrained in me at a very young age. My mom was very much a free spirit, and she, when she started to, she traveled the country in an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, which she had converted into a kind of a makeshift RV, so to speak. She took the back seat out of it, put a mattress in there and a sheet of plywood, and just traveled around the country, volunteering at different places, meeting up with, friends and family, and meeting all kinds of new people. And my mom and dad were divorced at that time. I was actually living in Pennsylvania with my father when she decided to do that, which, kind of allowed her the freedom to do it. I was about 16 years old. And, I remember when she called me to tell me she was doing it, she just said she had a bunch of friends who had just come back from, trips overseas to Europe, trips to the Caribbean. And they were talking about how, beautiful those places were. And it just got her thinking that, we live in a very beautiful country right here in the US, and many times we take it for granted and don't take the time to enjoy it. So she was working a really good job at the time, selling life insurance, and decided to give it all up and travel the country. And I was fortunate to do a little leg of that journey with her between my junior and senior year of high school. And, we traveled down the East Coast. And, again, I just remember how, there was really no agenda. She traveled a lot of secondary roads, not a lot of interstate highways. We stopped and surprised my one cousin in Virginia, in Quantico. He was in the Marines, based in Quantico. And, just stuff like that just stuck with me. And in early 2019, I took a couple road trips by myself, one from Pennsylvania to Texas and Louisiana, and another one to Orlando, Florida, and back to Pennsylvania. And it was kind of like on those two trips is when it really hit me that it was kind of like this aha moment that, wow, you know what? I really, really now understand why Mom did what she did. We did a lot of traveling in the organization I ran, but it was always a very regimented schedule. We were off to a youth baseball or softball tournament, so it was always, we had to be at a restaurant to get the kids fed and then back on the bus by a certain time and get to the complex by a certain time. So there was never really any time for me to actually enjoy the journey. And that was one of the things that my mom was a master at, was actually enjoying the journey. And it was on those 2 trips in 2019 where I, probably for the first time in my life since I had done that little stint with her between my junior and senior year of high school, was I able to enjoy the journey. And when I got home, I started writing. I'd already published a book at that point. I was working on adding chapters to my original book. And that's really kind of what sold me, because I initially, again, it felt like there was this voice telling me that it was time for a new chapter. And I wasn't necessarily accepting that, because the work that we were doing in our organization was very important work. I mean, we were changing the lives of young people. I loved my mom's story, but I always thought that was her story, not necessarily my story. So I wasn't grasping, the willingness to turn this page, so to speak, and start this new chapter. But what really kind of got me over the hump was my newly found inspiration to write. So I'd written like I hadn't written in years at that point. So that's really kind of what put me over the edge. I ran it by my wife. She wasn't sold on the idea initially. She thought I'd completely lost my mind. And again, she kind of had the same theory. It's like, that was your mom's story. It was an awesome story. We love telling that story, but it's not our story. And then there were some things happening in her professional life where doors that we thought were going to be opening weren't opening. And we just continued to take it as a sign and said, you know what? Maybe it's time to start a new chapter and to do this. And we're both all in at this point and have no regrets, and absolutely love every second of what we're doing.
Wonderful. And so a few questions have come out of that for me. So firstly, with your mum's work with the life insurance stuff, was she traveling in her work?
Not a lot.
Okay.
Not a lot. It was all just local house to house stuff, but all within, the county or surrounding counties of where we had lived.
Okay. And with I think probably people would like to be to have a little bit more understanding about the organization that you ran and what that did as well, because that sounds super interesting in itself.
Yes, I'd run a nonprofit youth sports organization for 30 years. I had actually founded the organization when I was 20 years old. So it was my baby. And we did some amazing work. We had, we always took the philosophy of, teaching leadership skills and life lessons through sports. So it wasn't a win at all cost type of organization. We were always very competitive on the field. Won a lot of games, won a lot of tournament championships, a lot of league championships, but that was never the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was always to prepare these kids for life. And, so to kind of put it into perspective, when, I started getting this urging to turn the chapter, I mean, at that point, I had spent 60% of my years on earth, giving to this organization. And again, it was something I founded. I'd run it, and it was a very tough decision. And one of the things that's come through us traveling around the country is being able to connect with some of my old players that came through the organization that are scattered throughout the country, and being able to see, a lot of the seeds that we had planted years and years ago now blooming and turning into these incredible young men and women that are doing amazing work, and having them tell you that they wouldn't be where they are today if it wasn't for the time they spent in our organization and the lessons they learned in our organization. And a lot of times as a, youth sports administrator, youth sports coach, you don't necessarily get to see the those seeds bloom. You planted them, but a lot of times you often wonder, because again, they go on, they live their life, and you may not have a chance to connect with them. So that's been an incredible blessing for us to be able to, to see the fruits of that labor for all those years and what they're doing out there in the world today.
Yeah, how amazing. So with the organization, how did kids find you?
It was all sorts of ways. I mean, we did a lot of, internet advertising. It was mostly word of mouth is probably the biggest thing. One set of parents would talk to another set of parents, and they'd recommend them to, come and try out for one of our teams. So that was, and again, I think that's one of the things that we prided ourselves on, is that, um, word of mouth. It was, again, that reassurance that we were doing something the right way, that people were recommending, um, other parents to send their kids to our organization. And we had a lot of kids that played, from the time they were 10 or 12 years old up and through their college years in our organization. And I think that, again, was a testament of us doing things the right way to kind of have that longevity. Because, nowadays in youth sports, you see kids jumping from one organization to another, to another, to another. So, that was always something that, we were always very proud of.
Amazing. But your wife didn't work in the business?
No, she helped out a lot. But she had a regular job. She was in the oil and gas industry for a while, and got downsized when another company bought her company after she was there for 23 years. And then she was working as a temp employee and was told that she would be, temp to full time. And that was the door that kept not opening for her.
Right.
And she was there as a temp employee for 2 years. And they kept telling her, we're not hiring. And after a while, it was like, you know what? This is a sign to move on. Let's go ahead and do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what did you end up doing with your organization? Did you sell it to someone else?
So we ran baseball and softball tournaments. That was our main source of revenue. So that was kind of the main asset that we had, that we did actually sell to another organization, to an actual for-profit organization. And now the organization still exists as a scholarship organization today. So, so it is still, still doing some work today yet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fab. And what was the first book that you wrote? What was that about?
It was titled "The Beauty of a Diamond Through the Eyes of a Coach," and it really chronicled, my years as a coach and as a youth administrator. And, again, talking about my coaching philosophy, which was, leadership skills and life lessons through the game. So, it's a great book for young coaches to get a hold of, and, establish a philosophy that's not just about wins and losses. And it's actually a book that would probably be good for, just business leaders as well, to take into, that same philosophy and that same approach that I took on the field. It can definitely carry over into the business world as well.
And what about for athletes, young people who want to get into sport in a big way?
Yeah, it would definitely fit them as well. Because again, it talks a lot about those lessons, the teamwork that you can learn through sports, the learning from failure, resilience, all that sort of stuff that sports will teach you if you allow it to. You're going to get knocked down in the world of sports, and your coaches should be teaching you that you can get back up and still be successful after you get knocked down on the field.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then, so was the getting into writing, was that something that came more in your middle age, or had you always been a writer?
I have written for as long as I can remember. It's just a way I've been able to easily express myself. I remember even as a young boy, probably 10, 11, 12 years old, my brother played on the adult soccer team, and I would actually write a weekly newsletter for their soccer team.
Wow.
Just out on notebook paper, handwritten with a pen. And I just remember the reaction, as the players and their wives and girlfriends would kind of pass the newsletter around on the sidelines before and after a game. And the comments, that they'd make about it just really made me feel good. So I always enjoyed writing So when I, got older, there was always aspirations to write a book. And it was a work in progress. I mean, when I first published it in 2012, it was about a 9-year project that it took me to write it, and that was just a lot of the time I was putting into the organization. It was tough to sit down and really be able to write. And then understanding a few years later that it probably wasn't done yet at that point, and adding 10 more chapters and republishing it in 2021, and then right on the heels of that, publishing my second book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1, that just came out this past May of 2022. So I think that kind of proves my point of how inspirational being on the road and traveling was. That I have been able to actually, publish 2 books in less time than what it took me to do the first one years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you, are you a journaler as well? Do you just, write for yourself?
Yeah. Yes. I blog. I don't necessarily, there's very few things that I write that I don't then publish. So, I do a blog, which is available on my website. And that just talks about our travels and places that we've been to and people that we've met, and just some of the experiences that we've gone through on the road.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have a publisher for your books, or are you publishing them yourself?
Published independently. I did have a publisher, and it really wasn't a great experience. So I've republished independently, and at this point, anything in the future, I think I'll just independently publish it. There's a lot of freedom in independent. I mean, it's there's work to it as well, but nowadays publishers aren't doing a whole lot of marketing for you anyway, and so there's not, at least in my own experience, there hasn't been a huge asset to having a publisher, other than kind of limiting your freedom a little bit. So I think it kind of equates to like independent music artists as well. You talk to a lot of music artists today, and they're like, what, we're okay with being independent because it's our own creativity, our own artistic that we're putting out there.
Freedom. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, any art form, I guess. I had another guest a couple of weeks ago who had she'd self-published as well, but she said she went to a self-publishing school, or I think it was an online course. Did you do that as well, or you already knew enough about it to not need to go through that?
I did not, and basically I may still actually do a self-publishing online course for future books, just because I had my manuscripts. They were already print ready when I kind of pulled them from the publisher and was able to to convert them back over. But I may, because I don't think that you can ever gather enough knowledge with stuff like that. So I've definitely seen a lot of advertisements for different online publishing schools and stuff like that. So it's definitely something I'll probably look into, just to be able to gain that knowledge.
Yeah, you're right. You can always learn something from any course that you do, can't you? So you left behind a job, and a bit like, as you said, your business was your baby. How did you manage that on an emotional level? How did you get yourself through that big change?
Surprisingly, like when we started selling all of our belongings and stuff, it was almost liberating. The toughest part was just getting my head around walking away from the organization and walking away from that baby. And once I did that and really kind of had an understanding that I could do even more meaningful work on the road than what I was doing in the organization, I think is what really sold me on that. But the actual physical process of downsizing and getting rid of stuff, I thought it would have been a lot harder than it was for me, but it really was liberating. You understand at that point how much just material things, how much, crap we accumulate over our lifetime that you use for a short period, and then it just sits and collects dust.
Yeah.
And as we got rid of a lot of that stuff, it was, I keep saying it, it was liberating. It was incredibly liberating and freeing to not have to be bogged down by all this stuff that society says, you should keep, you should consume, you should buy. And now our lifestyle is really more about experiences and living in the moment and valuing time that we have with other people and connecting with them.
So did you you don't have things in storage? You're back in your hometown now, so it wasn't tempting to put a bunch of stuff in storage? Did you just get rid of everything?
We have about 5 little storage bins at our one daughter's house, which each time we come back actually becomes less and less, because there's stuff and most of that honestly is family photos and some stuff like that. But we hung on to some clothing that we thought maybe with changes of seasons as we're traveling we may not need. But each time we go back to her house, we kind of go through a process of, I think it started out as 7 bins and it's down to 5 now.
Okay.
And each time it kind of shrinks down a little bit, because you go back and you're like, you know what, we won't need this anymore. Let's get rid of it. So, but yeah, we don't have a storage bin or anything like that. It's just, literally about 5 little, Rubbermaid bins that stuff's in right now.
Wow, that's amazing. So, so you mentioned, that you felt you could do more meaningful work on the road, and that was what helped you get through giving up your baby, your organization. What is the work that you're doing on the road? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's obviously the writing, blogging, and publishing books, podcast. Being able to interview some amazing guests, and they're both guests that we've met personally. Whether it's through a volunteer project that we're doing, someone else who's living full time in an RV and telling their story, or whether it's a guest that I get through the way you and I met through Podmatch.
Yep.
I just love telling those stories. I think everybody has a story to tell, and I think all those stories can be very inspirational. So I really love doing the podcast and getting feedback from people that they listened to an episode and it made them make a change in their life and that sort of thing. And obviously speaking as well, to speak to a group and have somebody come up to you afterwards and tell you that what you talked about really resonated. And then the other thing that we do in our travels is we do a lot of volunteer work. We volunteer with an organization called A Year to Volunteer, which is a RV centric volunteer organization that'll go to different nonprofit organizations or state parks or county parks, and we'll go in for a 2-week period and do a project of whether it's painting things or rebuilding things or anything that they don't have the the manpower, the resources to do with their normal staff. We'll go in there, and generally it's a group of anywhere from about 16 volunteers to 32 volunteers, depending on the size of the project. And again, when you're out there working 6-7 hours a day with like-minded people, it's really rewarding. And then seeing the work that you're doing there, the staffs come up to you and thank you, and how really impactful that work is for them, and then understanding that you're gonna leave and all that work that you did remains there, and the people of that community are going to be able to reap the fruits of your labor, that you were just there working to make improvements to their community.
And so in that kind of scenario, they provide you somewhere to park the RV, and is there anything else that you get as a volunteer?
that's pretty much it. There have been some projects where some community groups have come in and brought us meals and some stuff like that. But there's no guarantee of that. So we're in there planning on being self-sufficient for the 2 weeks, and if we get a meal or two as a bonus, that's just all the better. But it's just incredibly fulfilling work to see the impact that you're making on these communities before you hit the road again.
And if you wanted to, could you effectively drive from one volunteer project to the next and pretty much keep yourself occupied for the whole year?
We could. They do a project. Generally, it's a 2-week project, and then there's a week or maybe two off in between projects, and then they go to their next project. So in theory, we could certainly just tag along for an entire year and go from project to project. As a matter of fact, early in 2023, we have 3 projects lined up that are kind of back to back to back in February, March, and the beginning of April that we'll just travel to. And we did that this past spring as well with 2 projects. We were in Lake Charles, Louisiana for 2 weeks, had a week off, and then did another project in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. So there's definitely that opportunity to just caravan around with that group from project to project.
And are there other organisations that run the same kind of volunteer projects apart from A Year to Volunteer?
Yeah, there are some similar ones. I know Habitat for Humanity actually has an RV component. We've never done anything through them. So I know that's definitely out there. But those are really the only 2 that I know of that are, kind of set up, strictly for RVers.
Yeah. Okay. And your speaking engagements, you mentioned that. What kind of organisations asked you to speak, and what are they asking you to speak about? What are they wanting to get out of it for their audiences?
So obviously, with having a background in youth sports, youth sports organizations, and talking to coaches and doing like coaching workshops are, always something that I enjoyed doing. Outside of that, speaking to, business groups, or even, talking to people about just the whole less is more concept, are kind of the 3 main topics that they'll talk on. So coaching workshops, leadership talks, and then just the concept of less is more, and being willing to live outside of the societal norms of consuming everything that society says we should be consuming.
Can you talk a bit more about that? And I guess especially, kind of tips for people who aren't necessarily living in an RV or wanting to live in an RV, but just how do we, start being in that kind of mindset more, that if we did want to or need to, then we're not so attached to our material possessions, and number 2, that we don't have as many of them.
Yeah, I think it really is just a mindset of understanding that experiences are more important than things, and really kind of living in the moment and being present with those that you're around. As far as my wife and I now living in an RV, we kind of have a rule when it comes to clothing or something. There's a 1 in, 1 out rule. So if we buy a t-shirt or something, then a t-shirt has to leave the RV. If we buy a sweatshirt has to leave the RV. So if you almost take that mentality, even if you're not in an RV, where if you're going to get something new, you get rid of something old, I think it will help, just minimize that, consumerism, and, really make you realize that, if you stop and think about it, it's like, do I really need this? And if I do really need it, what should I get rid of to bring this in, as well. So it really is a mind shift to, just get out of that constant, consumer mentality that we're always told from the time we're little on up that we should be out there buying.
Yeah, we are. It's and it's so bad for the planet in the end, isn't it? That's the other big thing about it. Really, we need to be consuming less. And, it's a tiny percentage of the world's population that consumes the most stuff. And it's people in countries like yours and mine where that's going on. Yeah, it's a big deal. And even just you mentioning, experiences are more important than things. I always like to take that approach now with when you wanting to give somebody a gift, that you're giving them the gift of an experience, whatever that is, if that's a voucher to go to the movies or whatever with you, then, but it's just something where you're doing something together. It doesn't even have to be something that costs any money. But it's about, like you said, doing something, having an experience rather than giving them another thing that they probably don't need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the other week, my niece and I, she lives in Staten Island, New York, and we met her in New Jersey, and we did a 20-mile hike that was part of a larger event, an event called Mammoth March. So they go and put on these long distance hikes. So again, even that, it was just so incredible to be part of that and to kind of push your body to the limit, to do this. I mean, it was a very, very rocky terrain and a lot of, elevation changes and stuff like that. But at the end of it, it was like, we did it. We did it. We hiked 20 miles, and again, just taking in the beauty of of everything that was around us as we were doing that. It's an experience I'll never forget. For as long as I live, for sure.
So it was 20 miles in a day.
Yeah. It took us about 11 hours to do it.
Okay. And what's Mammoth March?
It's just it's an organization. They put on these events. It's they do a 20-mile and a 30-mile hike. They travel around the country. It's almost like like a 5K event or a marathon type event, but for for hiking and outdoor enthusiasts. I'm not a runner, so I would never ever do a 5K or or a half marathon or a marathon. I tell people all the time, if you see me running, you better run because there's something bad chasing me. But hiking, I love hiking and walking, and so I can do that. So I just kind of stumbled across it on Facebook that they were running these events, and I saw that they were doing one in Jersey, and I knew we'd be coming back across to that area at that time of the year, and it worked out perfect for us. So it was an amazing event. There were 1,300 people that did the event, and that was a combination. But I think out of 1,300, I think 200 of them did the 30-mile hike, and 1,100 did the 20-mile hike. But it was really cool, again, to just be in this big group of people, and they let you out and groups of like 5 or 6 to kind of space it out a little bit, and just again talking to people who were doing the same things that they that you were doing, and trying to figure out why they did it, why you were doing it, what drove you, and that sort of stuff. So it was pretty cool. They had rest stations and aid stations about every 5 or 6 miles, where you'd refill your water bottles and get a protein bar. The one station was making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for you. So it was a really well organized event, and I definitely think I'll probably do one again in the future for sure.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I love hiking too, so that's really good to hear about that for next time I'm in the US. So with you mentioned with your podcast and your blogging, you're telling the stories of the people that you meet. So I guess I'm interested in what inspired you to share those stories, but also if you've got a couple that you'd like to share with us.
The inspiration definitely, again, came from my mother. When she had passed away, I remember reading about, people she'd met in her journals and stuff like that. And when Sandy and I first started talking about doing this, that was one of the things I'd said to her. I was like, wouldn't it be cool, if Mom would have been able to do this in, the time that we live in now with social media and that sort of thing, and be able to share those stories in real time as opposed to us going through her old journals and stuff after she passed away. And I'd done a podcast for our organization since 2012 and just really enjoyed, again, telling the stories. It was just something that really resonated with me. And, so as we started, kind of putting our plan together that we were going to, start this new chapter, I started talking to the producer of our podcast for the organization and, told her that it was something I wanted to continue, and start a new podcast telling the stories of the people that we met. And, at that time, the only involvement I had in our podcast was actually conducting the interview. So I knew nothing about the editing process or how it even got to the internet. I just knew that I went into the studio, sat down, did an interview, walked out, and, got a link 3 days later. So she and another friend of mine who's a podcaster kind of walked me through the back end and all that sort of stuff. And, so off we went. And, as far as just any, in particular story, there's so many, but, one of the gentlemen that I was fortunate to interview was another one of our fellow volunteers, Orrin Fadler, and he's a retired general contractor from California. He's 80 years old now. His wife passed away, I want to say 2 years ago from cancer, and he'll go out and do like a 3-month stint of volunteer projects with the Year to Volunteer, where he's not a full-time RVer like us, but he'll go out and do 3 months or 2 months, 4 months, whatever the case is. And working with him is such a joy because I am far from like a handy guy, and he'll get me doing things that I never ever would have envisioned myself doing on my own. Like this last project that we did in Wisconsin was a raptor sanctuary, and we were building these flight mews, which is basically a glorified bird cage for an eagle or a falcon or something like that. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff that he would show me how to do it, and then walk away, and there I was screwing these pieces together. And he just loves not only doing the work but teaching others how to do that work. And so when I did my podcast with him, he talked about that his father-in-law kind of took him under the wing when he was first getting started in construction and that sort of stuff, and that always stuck with him, and was something that he felt it's time for him to give back and pass on some of that knowledge as well. So I absolutely love working with him every chance that we get. Whenever they're breaking the groups apart, I'm like, wherever Orrin's going, I'm going. So that's probably just one of my favorite stories of many. There's so many. I said there, every guest I've had on my show, they're all inspiring in their own way. But Orrin is one that always is very special to talk about.
So if you've done all that work with him, you must be a little bit handy by now.
I am. I'm definitely handier than I was when we started. There's no doubt about it.
And you better tell us what the name of your podcast is in case people are interested to tune in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's The Journey of My Mother's Son. Same name as my last book. And and you know, the website and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and again, that title's just derived from the fact that this is truly, a journey of my mother's son, one that I never thought that I would be on. But to be able to kind of honor her legacy with what we're doing as well is pretty special.
Yeah, and I love the name. It's beautiful to phrase it like that. Um, so so when you're not, doing, you're heading to a specific project or working on a specific project, I guess I'm interested in that, what you mentioned at the start about enjoying the journey, and kind of how do you, work out where you're going to go next or how long to stay somewhere. Can you kind of tell us about a typical, I don't know, maybe week or whatever, where you're not, heading to something specific?
Yeah, so we don't plan out very far in advance. Now we will be back here in Pennsylvania for about a month, but even that, we're not 100% sure what our departure time heading to warmer weather will be, or even where we're going for sure at this point when we leave here. It'll either be either Texas or Florida, somewhere where, like I said, it will be warmer. But we don't do a whole lot of planning in advance. When we do know of a spot we're going to be, even then, like the trip itself, there may be some times where we might not exactly know where we're staying at a certain night. We may just find ourselves in a Cracker Barrel parking lot, which is a restaurant chain here in Pennsylvania that allows RVs to park and stay overnight, or just a rest area or something. Again, we do we travel more interstates than what my mom did for sure. But anytime we can get off an interstate, we'll take advantage of that. And one of the things that's best there is kind of those impromptu stops where we'll be going along and we'll see an entrance to a state park. When we were up in New York after that hike, we went from Jersey to New York and then back down here to Pennsylvania. But we had, we found a state park and pulled in there and walked the trails with the dog for probably 2.5 hours, and came back and ate dinner in the camper, and then headed down the road. And those have always been our just coolest experiences, just ones that were completely off the radar. You see a sign, such and such state park, 2 miles to the right, and it's like, hey, let's take a shot and go in there. We did the same thing last year, driving up into Michigan. We were going along the Ohio border of Lake Erie, and it was getting around sunset, and there was this little park off to the right-hand side along the shores of Lake Erie, and we pulled in there and just got to see one of the most amazing sunsets we had seen in a long time. And so we try to keep it as impromptu as we can, but there's definitely times where we have reservations somewhere and we know
Mm-hmm.
when we've got to be there and stuff like that. But the times when we can just kind of drive and figure out where we're going to stay, as we start getting tired, those seem to be the best moments for sure. So I would say it's probably a 50-50 split of kind of having a route planned out and knowing where we're going if we're on our way to a project or a friend's house or event or something like that, to just kind of heading in a direction and knowing in a couple weeks we're going to be at a certain spot, but not exactly sure where we'll stop on the way.
Sounds lovely. And is there anything that you don't enjoy about the RV life?
I don't enjoy when people tailgate me.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, a lot of automobile drivers in the U.S. think that they've got to be like, literally 5 feet behind the bumper of an RV. or they feel like they absolutely have to pull out in front of us so that they don't get stuck behind us. But that's probably it. It really is an incredible, freeing lifestyle. And obviously the way gas prices have jumped up, that hasn't been wonderfully accepted. But you just work through it.
Are there any hybrid RVs on the market yet?
Not yet.
No.
Not that I know of anyway.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned your dog, and he or she, I'm not even sure, has an interesting name. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So he is a he, and his name is Euclid. And for anyone who's not a follower of baseball out there, he's named after the Boston Red Sox old third baseman Kevin Euclid.
Right.
So, being a big baseball fan and a big Red Sox fan, when we got him as a puppy, that's how he got his name. We call him Uke for short. So,
okay.
So there's always an explanation to people when they're walking them in a campground or on a trail or something. They're like, "Oh, what's his name?" And they're like, "Oh, okay, it's Euclid." And then you got to go through the whole thing. So I love when we meet somebody who actually is a baseball fan. They're like, "Oh, Kevin Euclid," So those are enjoyable moments for me. But most of the time, I know I'm just going to have to go through this little 3-minute explanation of how he got his name.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, I'm glad I'm not just being a baseball ignorant. I'm glad there's plenty of the others that you've come across, because I just wondered with the spelling Youkillis, and then I was thinking, is it something to do with you want him to kill whatever, I mean, I'm sure you wouldn't, but yeah, anyway. Glad we covered that off. So is there anything that you want to tell people about, all the offerings that you have, just covering off maybe where we can find your books? I'm assuming your podcast is on all the podcasting platforms, is it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you find podcasts, you can find it. But easiest way to find anything that I'm doing is just on my website. And I've got 2 URLs to my website, journeymymotherson.com, or I'll use my name, just danclouser.com. They both go to the exact same site, but sometimes people get caught up in, Journey of My Mother's Son, typing it all out. So easier way to get there is just danclouser.com, but all the links are there to the podcast, to, if anybody's looking to engage me for a speaking engagement, or, my blogs are there, links to the books are there. Really anything that you need to know about what we're doing is right there on the website.
And are you on social media? So if people want to follow your journey around the country, they're able to do that?
Absolutely. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn are kind of the 3 social media spots I hang out the most.
And is that under your name?
Instagram is Dan Clouser 5. Facebook is just my name, Dan Clouser, or my page, Dan Clouser, author. And then LinkedIn is just Dan Clouser as well.
Okay. And maybe, Dan, can you just leave us with a few words of, I guess, what you've learned? What are your biggest learnings that you've had from taking on this new life, and that people who aren't necessarily living that same lifestyle can try and bring into their own lives?
I think, again, number one, like I said earlier, is just enjoy the moment, live in the moment. Be present with those that you're around. Understand that we truly aren't guaranteed anything except this very moment that we're in. So cherish that, and understand that life is really more about the experiences than it is about the things. So if you're thinking of going out and buying a new car, a new whatever, think again and think about how you might be able to, put that money towards something else and go out and, truly experience something. And I loved what you said earlier about, when you're getting a gift, get an experience instead, and to be able to, if you're getting your grandkids, a ticket to the movies or something where they can also spend that time with you. I think that's a great way to really, minimize that consumerism and, really value, the ability to connect with others. I think, throughout the pandemic, if there's one thing we had learned is that, whether we're introverted or extroverted or, whatever our personality type is, we actually do need other people. And that human connection is very important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And thank you so much for saying that and for sharing your story with us. Really interesting to hear that journey that you've been on and that you're continuing to be on. And I really thank you for your time today, Dan.
I appreciate you having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.